A palace courtyard in Addis Ababa, September 1974. An old man in a plain suit is led down the steps by junior army officers, and there's a car waiting for him.
Not a state car. A Volkswagen Beetle. Pale blue. They put the King of Kings, the Lion of Judah, in the back seat of a Beetle.
And he objects, not to being deposed, to the car. He says that if the revolution is for the people, he accepts it, but this is not how he should be treated.
And the crowd of soldiers outside the gates laughs and jeers as it drives past. That's the moment 3,000 years of Ethiopian monarchy ends. In a hatchback.
Haile Selassie, emperor for 44 years, a man who in 1936 stood in front of the League of Nations and told Europe exactly what was coming for them.
And who was right, and who was ignored, and who then survived long enough to become the thing he'd warned about, a ruler who couldn't see his own people.
This one's the hardest of these stories, I think, because he was genuinely a great man for about half of his life.
So let's start with what Ethiopia was, because it's unlike anywhere else on the continent.
An independent Christian kingdom with its own church, its own script, its own calendar, and a dynastic claim tracing back to Solomon and Sheba.
Which is legend, but it's a legend that was written into the actual constitution as a legal fact.
And critically, it beat a European colonial army in the field. Adwa, 1896. Menelik II destroys an invading Italian force.
Which is enormous. In the middle of the scramble for Africa, one African state stops a European empire and stays independent.
So Ethiopia becomes a symbol for Black people worldwide, long before Haile Selassie exists as a public figure.
He's born Tafari Makonnen in 1892, son of a general and governor who was a close advisor and cousin to Menelik.
Small, quiet, bookish child, extremely clever, made a provincial governor at 14.
And what he's brilliant at, from very young, is court politics, patience, alliances, waiting for opponents to make mistakes.
Menelik's chosen heir is a young man who alienates the church by appearing sympathetic to Islam, and Tafari and the nobility remove him in 1916.
And Tafari becomes regent, with Menelik's daughter as empress, so he holds real power for 14 years before he's crowned.
And he uses it well. He gets Ethiopia into the League of Nations in 1923, partly by agreeing to suppress the slave trade. He travels to Europe in 1924, first Ethiopian ruler to leave the country, and comes back convinced Ethiopia must modernize or be eaten.
Crowned emperor in 1930 in a ceremony designed for the world's newsreels, foreign delegations, uniforms, an event staged for international cameras. And a year later, he issues the first written constitution in Ethiopian history.
Which sounds progressive, and here's the catch. Read what it actually does.
It creates a parliament with no power, and it formally strips the regional nobility of their traditional rights, transferring all of it to the emperor personally.
It's a modernizing document that centralizes absolute power. That's the pattern of his entire reign in one text.
Then 1935. And Mussolini.
Italy invades from Eritrea and Somaliland, and this is not Adwa. 40 years of technology have happened.
Bombers, tanks, and chemical weapons. Mustard gas sprayed from aircraft over villages, marketplaces, herds, and rivers.
Sprayed deliberately onto the barefoot infantry and their livestock, blistering agent on people with no protection of any kind.
And they bombed Red Cross field hospitals, which even in 1936 was a shocking thing to admit to.
The Ethiopians fight hard, but there's no answer to it. And in 1936, he goes into exile and to Geneva.
And gives the speech. And this is where he earns everything he's remembered for.
The Italian journalists in the gallery scream abuse at him until they're removed by security. He stands and waits.
And he speaks in Amharic, and he lays out the gas attacks in detail. And he asks the assembly what it intends to do.
And the line that matters, it is us today, it will be you tomorrow.
3 years later, Poland.
And the League does nothing meaningful. Sanctions that excluded oil, and Britain and France quietly negotiating to hand Italy most of Ethiopia anyway.
He spends 5 years in exile in Bath, in England, in a modest house, funding himself partly by selling possessions.
And then in 1941, British and Commonwealth and Ethiopian forces drive the Italians out, and he walks back into Addis Ababa 5 years to the day after he left.
Which is an extraordinary story. He's the first leader to be restored after fascist conquest. That's a genuine moral summit.
And the post-war decades are the peak of his international standing.
Founding figure of African independence diplomacy. Addis Ababa becomes the headquarters of the Organization of African Unity in 1963.
He mediates between newly independent states and sends Ethiopian troops to Korea under the UN flag.
And there's the Rastafari movement, which is its own remarkable thing. In Jamaica from the 1930s, his coronation is read as the fulfillment of prophecy.
His pre-coronation name and title, Rastafari, becomes the name of the faith. He's regarded as divine by people he'd never met.
And when he visits Jamaica in 1966, over 100,000 people surround the aircraft. He reportedly wouldn't come down the steps for a long time.
He was an Orthodox Christian and never claimed divinity. He handled it graciously, and it made him no less uncomfortable.
But here's the thing about all that international prestige. It was distracting him, and it was distracting everyone else, from what wasn't happening at home.
Which was land reform. That's the whole domestic tragedy in 2 words.
Ethiopia, in the 1960s, still runs on essentially feudal tenure. In the South especially, peasants working land they don't own.
Handing over a large share of what they grow to a landlord, plus labor obligations, plus church dues.
Estimates for tenant shares run to a half or more of the harvest in some regions. No security of tenure, evicted at will.
And every reform commission that studied it recommended change, and the recommendations went into a drawer for decades.
Because the landowning class was his political base, and moving against them meant a fight he'd been avoiding since the 1930s.
The man who transformed his international position could not bring himself to confront the nobility of his own country.
And then the university students who he'd created.
That's the irony. He built the schools and the university. He sent students abroad. He wanted a modern administrative class.
And they came back reading Marx and looking at the countryside and asking the obvious question. Land to the tiller became the slogan of the whole student movement.
There's an attempted coup in 1960 by his own imperial bodyguard while he's on a state visit to Brazil.
It fails, and it's crushed, and he learns nothing from it. He doesn't reform afterward, he tightens.
And there's Eritrea, which is a running wound, federated with Ethiopia after the war, then annexed outright in 1962, ending its autonomy.
That starts a war that lasts 30 years and outlives him by decades.
And then the famine, and this is what actually kills the monarchy.
Wallo Province, 1972 into 1973. The rains fail, and a large number of people die. Estimates range widely, but well into the tens of thousands, plausibly far more.
And the government's response is to conceal it, not to mismanage relief, to deny it was happening.
Because a famine would embarrass Ethiopia internationally, and the emperor's whole identity was Ethiopia's standing in the world.
Roads were reportedly closed to keep journalists out, relief agencies were obstructed, officials who reported it were ignored.
And then a British documentary team gets footage out in late 1973.
And what destroys him isn't the famine footage on its own. It's the editing.
Ethiopian television, later under the new regime, cut the starving children against archive film of a palace banquet. Meat being served, the emperor's dogs being fed from a silver tray.
That intercut was propaganda, and it was also close enough to true that nobody could defend against it.
And 1973 also brings the oil shock. Fuel prices jump, so taxi drivers strike in Addis Ababa. Then teachers overpay and a school reform.
And then, crucially, the army, a mutiny at a remote garrison in the south over rotten food and no clean water.
And they discover something. They arrest their officers, make demands, and the government concedes immediately.
So the next garrison does it, and the next, because it works.
And the mutinies escalate from water and pay to political demands, and by mid-1974, a committee of junior officers is formed to coordinate.
The Derg, which just means committee, mostly majors and captains and NCOs, no general, no obvious leader at first.
And what they do is genuinely novel. They don't storm the palace, they dismantle it in slow motion over 4 months.
Arresting one minister at a time, announcing each arrest on the radio, always claiming loyalty to the emperor himself.
Nationalizing the imperial businesses, taking the palaces one by one, removing his staff around him.
By September, he's an 82-year-old man alone in a building with no government left attached to him.
And on the 12th, they read the deposition proclamation to him. And he says, quietly, that if it is for the good of the people, he accepts.
And then the beetle.
And what follows is worse than the fall. The Derg turns out to be far more brutal than anything the empire did.
Sad. In November, they execute around 60 former officials without trial, ministers, generals, 2 former prime ministers.
And Mengistu emerges on top, and the Red Terror follows. Tens of thousands killed, bodies left in the streets, families charged for the bullets.
And the emperor dies in August 1975, in a room in the palace grounds. The official statement is circulatory failure after a prostate operation.
Almost nobody believed it then. It's widely thought he was smothered.
And they hid the body. It was found in 1992 under a concrete slab, reportedly beneath a palace latrine.
Which was a deliberate desecration. Bury the Lion of Judah under a toilet so there's no shrine.
Sadly, he was finally given a funeral in 2000, paid for privately, with the government refusing its state status.
So, how do you weigh this one?
He's the only leader in these stories who was, at one point, unambiguously on the right side of history and speaking truth to the whole world.
And who then spent 30 years perfecting the art of not hearing it himself.
The Geneva speech was a warning about people in power ignoring suffering because acknowledging it was inconvenient.
And he died deposed because he ignored a famine, for exactly that reason.
The moral is uncomfortable, and it's simple. Moral clarity about other people's crimes is easy. It buys you nothing.
A leader is judged by what he's willing to see in his own house.
This was History But Better Podcast, Episode 9.